people of Italy take to the streets in protest at austerity plans, while the courts in Germany block attempts to limit bailouts for struggling euro economies. Can the eurozone and the euro survive the increasingly bitter political battles within European nations? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Taimur Nabili. Italy, the Eurozone's third largest economy, has finally introduced its already much criticised austerity plan. But the angry response of Italy's citizens and trade unions has once again cast doubt on the stability both of Berlusconi's government and the whole euro enterprise.
Sounding a warning to Silvio Berlusconi's government. Thousands marched in Rome saying no to a planned austerity package worth $65 billion. The government's promised to balance the budget in 2 years' time. Some protesters compared the cuts to a massacre.
In our nurseries, they're putting too many kids in one class. They need to reduce the numbers so teachers can really teach them.
There's no work and no more pensions for us old folk. They're taking everything from the poor and the workers.
Italy's largest union, the CGIL, also called a national strike, stopping public transport for 8 hours in many towns and hitting services like clinics. The union's new head told Al Jazeera the government should be pushing job creation as a way out of the crisis.
The plan must work on growth instead of depressing the economy, work on the quality of public employment and services instead of cutting them and depressing them.
Behind the good-natured demonstration lies real anger and concern. The people on the streets here in Rome are worried about having to work longer to qualify for pensions and cuts to public services. But among the wider population, there is a feeling that austerity measures are inevitable.
The European Central Bank has been buying up Italian government bonds, but private investors are selling, a sign they fear Italy could default on its huge debt. It's far from clear how quickly the government can act. And that's ringing alarm bells for the rest of Europe.
Well, joining me on the programme today are, from Rome, Pietro Paganini, who's an adjunct professor of management at John Cabot University, and in Brussels, Fabian Zulig is the chief economist at the European Policy Centre. Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us. Pietro Paganini, if I may begin with you, can you just give us a view from Italy as to how serious the conditions are there in your mind?
Well, the conditions are very serious, and there are two problems here. There are two types of crises. There is the economic and financial crisis, that is a global crisis, but it's particularly a European crisis. And then with Italy and with Spain, for instance, but I wouldn't exclude other European countries, there is a political problem. We are living a crisis, and of course it's very bad because it's affecting a lot of people. They are losing their jobs, as someone said, particularly young people. There is a generational problem. But at the same time, this is an enormous, a great opportunity that Italy should take to run the reforms. And there are two reforms that should be run. One is finally cutting the debt and the public spending. And the second one is to reform its policy and the country policies, and particularly liberalize and privatize, is reducing the gap that has been built between different generations, but creating a more free market where people can actually compete and where young generation can enter the market. We are experiencing a horrible problem here. We have experienced that a lot of young people cannot enter the market, and there are then a generation older or 2 generation olders that they retire when they are 40, when they are 50. We have cases of people retiring 40, 35. This is not possible. This is unacceptable. The other reform is to reduce bureaucracy as much as possible.
So Italy's in a horrible situation, but does Italy, the government and to a certain extent the people, believe that the Euro governments, the Eurozone enterprise as a whole has been supportive enough or solid enough to help Italy in its problems?
If you're referring to me, well, I would say that Italy should walk on her own leg. Italy has a great chance, as I told you before. The European Union should provide a lead first of all, and what we're seeing now, and I'm sure that Brussels thinks in a very different way, but what we're seeing now, what we're experiencing now, is the lack of leadership at the European level. Some people are asking whether is Germany the leader. Where is France the leader? Well, no, I think there should be a European leadership, but it shouldn't be the Eurobond that somebody is asking for. That's just a way to delay the cure. What we need to do instead is Italy to take advantage of this bad situation and make the necessary reforms that are needed at this time. And I don't think it should be later on. We should do it now, and we have the occasion. Although I'm not sure that the government is capable in this particular condition to do this.
All right.
So probably we will have to wait for another government.
Well, we'll talk about the issue of leadership and what exactly that leadership should consist of in just a couple of minutes. First, though, let me go to Brussels and join Fabienne Zuleg to ask the question about the current Italian austerity package. Now, Pietro was talking there about the need for bringing the finances into line and the need for this austerity package. But on the other hand, you've got an increasingly difficult economic situation and increasing unemployment. Surely the way to get out of economic contraction is not for further austerity, is it?
Well, the problem is we really have to square the circle at the moment. We have to manage better public finances, and the markets are not allowing European governments any leeway in that area. But at the same time, we also have to make sure that we set the right conditions for future growth, and that means also investing in the economy.
Well,
so we have to do both at the same time.
Let me stop you there for just a moment.
Difficult.
Let me just stop you there for just a moment, because this suggestion that the markets are not allowing the process to go ahead as it should, is that actually true? I mean, of course, in the long term, the economic numbers must be brought into line. But in this particular short-term situation, the bond markets aren't punishing any major economies for their debt problem. Is it not possible for the governments to take on more debt, backed, of course, by more guarantees from Europe? But at this stage, isn't the more sensible way to actually grow your way out of the problem rather than try and cut your way to an ideal situation of balance sheets?
Well, the situation in Europe is that we still have very different countries in very different positions. For some countries, of course, there would be the possibility to continue to spend, to continue to borrow money at the markets without the punishment, countries such as Germany, but actually those countries are not the ones who need the positive impulses. For other countries, the borrowing is very restricted, and in the cases of countries such as Portugal, Ireland, and especially Greece, they are now very much bound by the conditions of the rescue packages they had to access from the European Union and the IMF.
Now, Pietro, the Italian spread between Italian 10-year and German 10 years is widening, and borrowing is becoming more difficult. But again, I just want to question the recipe that has been proposed here and question the idea that further austerity is the way to deal with this. Surely there must be a better prospect of growing out of the situation than there is of cutting out of the situation. And the only way to stop the problem with interest rates in Italy is for a stronger backing from the Germans and from the other European nations, and saying, right, we're going to backstop, we're going to lend you the money at favorable interest rates until you get out of this problem.
Well, what you're saying here is theoretically right and correct. The question is whether you have a family and you are the father of the family or the mother, and you keep lending money to your kids and your kids are wasting that money. Would you keep lending money? Probably you stop and you will ask your kids to change life. So I think that that's what the European Union should do now with Italy, and it's partly doing it. They should probably do it in a more severe way. That is Italy saying, adjust your accounting, stop your debt, because it's not possible to grow on debt. Plus, as was said previously, let me just stop you there for a moment. Back to the growth.
Let me just stop you there for a moment, because of course what you say is right. You can't grow on debt indefinitely, and the basic principles of borrowing and lending on paper are as you say. But we're not at that situation in practical terms, are we? I mean, Italy's debt problem was not a problem until the financial crisis hit. Italy could have financed its debt quite easily, except for the conditions around the rest of the world. So it's not as if we are at crisis. We would have been at crisis point in Italy without the broader problems. And it's not as if Italy can't finance further debt for the short term until austerity can actually be put into place.
Yeah, that's. I see your point, but I keep saying that the problem with Italy was the same 10, 20, 30 years ago, and it has never been fixed. So some of what you've been proposing and what it's written on the papers and the same European Union, some of the investors are saying is correct. But as I said previously, I believe, and many more people, I'm telling you, even here in Italy, are believing it. It's time to change, and we need that radical change soon and now, at the risk of paying a big shock. People like me, but other people, particularly new generations. New generation are already paying for that. They are paying the shock.
All right, well, let's bring in another element to this entire debate that's going on in Europe, running concurrently to Italy's problems, are the events that have taken place in Germany. On Wednesday, the Constitutional Court rejected a lawsuit that was aimed at blocking Berlin from bailing out struggling European neighbours. The court has ruled that Germany's contribution to a European Union bailout fund for Greece was legal. It's found no proof that that left a hole in the country's budget. However, the judges in Germany have also said that Parliament's Budget Committee must now have a bigger say in any future bailouts. This, of course, making it more difficult for Germany and therefore the Eurozone to move as quickly should the need arise in future. Let's get back to Brussels and Fabian and ask for your thoughts on this particular ruling. I mean, how does that affect the problems not only in Italy but elsewhere around Europe?
I think the first thing we have to say is that the ruling is a positive step towards a solution, towards strengthened economic governance in the European Union. It was a ruling which was widely expected. There wasn't the expectation that the Constitutional Court would rule against the rescue packages. But in the actual ruling, it looks quite positive towards the capacity of the German government to act in crisis such as the one we have seen.
Further,
of course,
what you mean by that?
Sure. The court has said that, of course, the court's responsibility is to check compatibility of any kind of action with the German constitution, but actually that the German government has a lot of political and economic leeway to make decisions independently, and that it is not the role of the Constitutional Court to interfere in those. So in that sense, what we've actually seen is strengthening the room for maneuver for the German government. And I think we will see this ruling as an important milestone on the way to an improved governance at the European level.
Pietro, is that how you interpret the German court's decision?
Well, I don't want to dispute on the German court decisions, but I think that the German citizens, particularly the ones that are complaining, in a sense, are right. They see their country that is actually saving other countries. If I'm responding the question, but you see, we're getting to that situation again because there is the leadership, and here the risk is that we go back to Europe prior to 20 years ago, where European citizens will start lacking a trust in their institution. They lack trust in the European institution as well. That it's growing like a leviathan, but at the moment is not capable of providing solutions. We can see the same thing in the United States, where there was a great political problem, but it seems that the administration and the government and the Congress, in a way, found the right way. I think the same thing should be found in Europe, where there is, of course, a conflict of interest between 27 countries, particularly the biggest one, and the European Union itself.
Well, you spoke earlier on about leadership issues. What is your thinking in terms of where the leadership should come from and what form it should take?
Well, the leadership, I don't want to be populistic here, but the leadership should come from people. People should be able to elect and decide whether people they have been electing at a European level. I'm not just referring to the European Parliament, but also the Commission and the presidencies. At the moment, people don't perceive the European Union. If you just walk around Rome, but I could say it's the same thing probably in London, UK, or it's the same thing in Stockholm, there is a lack of perception of what the European Union is about. And today there is also the comprehension and the sensibility that their leaders are not capable of running out of this crisis, and we are seeing this in Rome. And the financial situation and the going up and down of the stock market is not just because of the financial crisis. It is also, but it's also because of a lack of credibility of some of the single countries, and Italy is one of them. If you think about today, the government came up yesterday night with a revolution, according to them, that is to increase the VAT of 1% to fight tax evasion. Now, who doesn't pay taxes now is not going to pay taxes if VAT is 21%. This is the first problem. And the second problem is that a fiscal reform should be done, and we can discuss this in detail, but the government doesn't want to take that fiscal reform.
Well, let's throw it to Fabian, because one of the elements of leadership that a lot of people are talking about now, Fabian, is a lot of people are suggesting that Germany should actually take this leadership role much more seriously and actually take over much stronger, not manipulation, but management, if you like, of the economic situation all over Europe, what they call greater fiscal power. I mean, is this the way forward? Instead of actually trying to keep the people, as Pietro was talking about, involved in the decision making, that the elites should impose what should go on in most of Europe?
Well, what we've already seen in the current crisis is that Germany's role has been strengthened quite considerably. I think there's a recognition now that when we are talking about solving any problems within the Eurozone, that it cannot be done unless Germany is on board. But what we need for the future is actually a system which involves all of the countries in the Eurozone, certainly also the countries which are due to join the Eurozone in the near future, and where we make decisions together collectively at the European level. I think if we continue to be stuck at a governmental level, we will have problems, and we shouldn't rely in the long term on just a single country for the leadership. Because we have to also remember that Germany has not always been the most positive. Germany broke the Stability and Growth Pact, for example, in the past.
Let me ask you again to just elaborate a little bit on what you said just then. What do you mean by decision making at a European level? What kind of decisions and what kind of body to make them?
Well, what we've done in the past is we created a monetary union, but we haven't created the economic union which has to go with that. And we're now paying the price for that. So what we will have to have is more harmonized rules around, for example, fiscal policy, around social policy, around labor market policies, a number of areas which are very, very contentious and where the EU and the Eurozone has had very few competences in the past. My preference would be that we actually make these decisions through the European institutions at the European level rather than through intergovernmental mechanisms. Right. Even though a number of the member states are looking more at the intergovernmental route at the moment.
That's what I thought you were saying. And let me throw it back to you, Pietro. How do you think those people on the streets in Italy right now would react to the suggestion that there should be a supranational European body that takes control of spending and taxation decisions on a zone-wide basis?
Well, if you walk down the street, people think often with their brain, but nowadays people are thinking with their stomach because they see their jobs departing, they see problems, and they are very, very much frustrated. So they are not really interested in what is happening at the European level at the moment. They are rather looking at what their government is trying to do.
But they would be interested if some unelected European body turned around and said, well, taxes in Italy must go up.
Well, they could be interested, but I think in this case, and this is an invitation to the European Union to take more action, there should be more communication from the European Union, European Commission, for instance, and a clear communication, and making people understanding the role of the European bodies, that this is something that is not happening. Obviously, here is very well divided to answer your questions. There are people that, of course, they hope there will be bailouts and there will be somebody paying their debts. And there are people that have a more long-term perspective who are thinking that there should be no intervention by the European Union and Italy should walk on her own leg, because I think Italy has all the tools and all the chances to walk out of the crisis. It's a great economy. The European economy is a great economy. There was an interesting blog post by Nelly Kroes exactly yesterday after her trip to Silicon Valley, and she was exalting the Silicon Valley. Well, I would like to hear more of the European commissioners and the European ministers and leaders telling us how we can go back to the roots of entrepreneurship. In the end, the country where I'm speaking from was the country that, in a way, invented modern capitalism, and was the country that gave birth to modern entrepreneurship. What we need to do is really going back to that roots and finding out how people can become more entrepreneurial, how can they start more business, and they can attract more business.
All right.
We tend to subsidize the south of Italy. Instead, the south of Italy is a great resource. We need to find a way how we make that resource flourish.
Fabian, one thing Pietro is probably right about, and that is that the people on the streets of Italy and elsewhere in Europe probably aren't too interested in the minutiae of policy being made in Europe. But what they would probably be interested in is knowing whether this whole euro enterprise is going to succeed or fail, because a failure of the euro as a currency is surely going to mean a massive financial problem in the European financial zone overall, isn't it? So how likely is it that we are at a point where a complete collapse of the euro system is going to happen?
I think we are actually at a more positive point than we've been even a few weeks ago. I think the recognition in many member states, especially important member states like Germany, is now clearer that the euro does bring us a lot of benefits, and that we have to do everything we can to sustain it. And the court verdict this morning actually helps, because we are in a position now where we can move ahead with the economic governance changes. That doesn't mean that the risks are over. There are still a lot of risks along the way, a lot of political risks, a lot of credibility risks, and we do need the leadership at the European level. But I think overall we are moving in the right direction. What we need to see now is that the actions do take place, which have been promised.
All right, very quickly then, as a final summary, you think we're moving in the right direction and inching towards a solution that will keep Europe as it is right now. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we're moving towards a solution, I think, of more Europe. So we will have more decisions made at the European level. And that will, in the end, safeguard the European currency.
And Pietro, let me ask you for a concluding statement as well. I mean, where is Italy going economically and as part of Europe? Do you think that this whole euro enterprise will find a way out of these problems?
Well, I hope so. You know, I don't have enough figures at the moment, and I don't have, the crystal ball to see what the future is, unfortunately. You know, economics should be about forecasting, but we cannot really forecast what's going to happen. What I want to say, though, is that if you look at some of the economic figures, the macro figures, and also some of the micro figures, we see that Italy is not really doing bad. Yeah, there is a loss of job, there are a lot of problems, but if you go down, for instance, to what some of the SMEs are doing, you see that exportation has been incrementing in the last month. Some of the figures are telling us that Italian economy is vivid, it's flourishing. It's just that there is a political problem, there is a financial global crisis, there is a strong political problem. What we need to do is like when you have a dog leashed to your leash.
Let me stop you there for a minute.
The dog.
That political problem is where we began, asking the question, can Berlusconi survive the problems that are going on in Italy right now? Very quickly, do you think that he will?
Well, he has one year and a half to go, so I think he will go till the end. The question is, he will succeed in reforming the state? My answer is, I'm sorry, very pessimistic, no.
All right, thanks very much indeed. Pietro Paganini joining us live from Rome, and also in Brussels, Fabian Zulig. Thank you both for joining us here on Inside Story today. And thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the programme. We always welcome your comments and suggestions. You can send them to us by email. Our address is insidestory@aljazeera.net. For the moment, it's goodbye from the programme. We'll see you soon.